Hello, everyone. This is Jacob Povio, the producer of The Apex, and this episode, Jan and RJ interview retired Brigadier General Richard Green. With over 35 years of military experience, General Green has held many different leadership positions. Find out about his outlook on leadership and lessons he learned that took him from the beginning of ROTC Cadet to being charged with the care of over 5,000 members of the Ohio Air National Guard. If you want to support us, there are two ways to do so. One is to donate to the cause at www.patreon.com/The Apex Podcast. And the other is completely free. If you learn something from this episode, all we ask is you share it with a friend. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your Apex.
Welcome, Apex Chasers, to another episode of the Apex Podcast. I am your host, Jan Almasy, and as always, seated across the table from me, or I guess next to me at this table, is my co-host and partner in crime, Mr. R.J. Holiday.
Hi, everybody. We're in what you guys will find out here in a little bit, but we're in a different location today. It's a special location, the first place that I did my interview before I was a co-host here, so I'm really excited to be back. I'm really excited for this interview, and we hope you guys enjoy it.
Yep, so we are actually at Walsh University in the original studio that the first episode of the Apex Podcast was recorded in. So huge shout out to Walsh University for supporting the Apex Podcast from its inception. Also, like RJ mentioned, this was the first place that RJ got behind a microphone prior to actually being brought onto the team as the official co-host.
This time I'll make sure to sit in a lucrative position around the table so
instead
everybody
of
can see
being
my face.
Instead of being blocked by a mic stand. We were rookies at that point in time.
We're professionals now.
Yeah, we decided we learned. We got an LLC.
Yeah, look at that.
We're official. Okay, so today I have to give a little bit of a disclaimer just because we will be interviewing a member, prior member of the United States Armed Forces. So, in order to make everybody happy, I will mention that the opinions that are expressed on this episode, whether by myself or by our guest, do not reflect the official stances of the Department of Defense, the Air National Guard, or the Air Force as a whole. These are the personal opinions of myself and the guests that are present on this podcast, and will be referred to as such throughout the rest of the show. So with that being said, I'll read through our introduction here. So our guest, seated across the table from me, for those of you that are watching, completed a 35-year career as an Air Force officer. He served as the Assistant Adjutant General, Air, and the Commander of the Air National Guard in the state of Ohio. The Air National Guard in the state of Ohio consists of approximately 5,000 personnel at that time, including 4 flying wings and 8 support units that served our state and nation. He was originally commissioned in 1970, completing his undergrad pilot training at Columbus Air Force Base, Mississippi. He served in various operations and command positions, including the Chief of Safety, the Chief of Standardization and Evaluation, the 164th Airlift Squadron Operations Officer and Commander, the 179th Operations Group Commander, the 179th Airlift Wing Vice Commander, and then assumed command of the 179th Airlift Wing on 11 March 2000 and relinquished that position to accept a general's commission on 13 December 2003. He was a pilot with more than 7,200 military flying hours. He has also served as the president of the Ohio National Guard Association and a wide variety of other leadership positions. His education includes a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics in 1970, completing Squadron Officers School at Maxwell Air Force Base in 1978, completing his Master's of Arts in Management in 1982, and completing the Air Command and Staff College in 1988, as well as the Army War College in 1992. So, without further ado, the gentleman seated across the table from me, who I have the privilege of sitting in the studio with today, is retired Brigadier General Richard Green. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. We're really excited about this interview.
Yeah,
it's been a long time in the works. Before I was even a co-host, I heard about the interview coming up. So I was like,
heard whispers in the wind.
Yeah. So
this has been on my personal bucket list for quite a while. So we actually met through my first guest on the show, Lieutenant Colonel Phil Brown. So I actually never really heard how my name even came up in conversation in the first place. How exactly was I even put on your radar when, like, Colonel Brown came on the show? How exactly did that play out initially?
Well, Colonel Brown knew how much I was interested in, the concepts of leadership, and he also knew you, and he saw the link between, me and you, and suggested it, and I'm glad he did.
And then the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yeah. So that's been essentially the story of this show as it's developed. Every single guest that we've had on here has been either a recommendation of a different guest or somebody that I just met in passing whose ideas happen to align with the way that, I think, the way that RJ thinks, or the idea behind the Apex podcast. So for those of you that are tuning into the Apex podcast for the first time this episode, essentially our mission here is to provide practical and applicable leadership knowledge to people in general. Really, I try to focus on teaching people how to follow, whether it's following yourself, following a dream, chasing a passion, any of those ideas or attributes we try to develop and pull out of guests through, our tagline is ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things, and the human elements that got them there. And what we mean by the human elements, it's not the, what is present on a piece of paper. It's what is present in that person's mind and how they developed themselves over the course of a long period of time. So with that in mind, why don't we just start with, where did you grow up?
In New Jersey.
Really?
Outside New York City.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, a long time ago. And, I was born in 1948, so my younger lifetime was in the 50s and 60s until I went to college in West Virginia. I wanted to get away from the big city, so I departed New Jersey for West Virginia, and then eventually into the Air Force.
So do you come from a military family? What did that transition happen between wanting to leave the big city, going to university in West Virginia to commissioning in the Air Force?
That's a big difference going from New Jersey to West
New
Virginia.
Jersey.
Yeah.
You almost said.
Yeah, I was trying to hit up the accent there, but yeah, that's a huge change.
It is. It really is. In my family, my grandfather was in World War I, and there were certain pieces of wall hangings we had around the family from his experiences in World War I. My dad was in World War II, and he was in the Navy.
Okay.
And in fact, he was on an aircraft carrier that was hit by a kamikaze, and like 90 people were killed in that crash. But my entry into the Air Force was for different reasons. I was in college during the heydays of the Vietnam War. And as soon as I graduated, I had a draft number that was low enough that I would most likely go in the military. And so I decided that the best way to do it would be doing it my way, not, being drafted and put
doing it Uncle Sam's way.
Yeah. So
Right.
I ended up joining ROTC and, in the Air Force and going to pilot training.
So you went through ROTC training in West Virginia.
Yes.
Gotcha.
My junior and senior year.
Gotcha. So when you were down at West Virginia, there's a lot of people that I think that people have this perception that you have to have life figured out in college, which drives me absolutely bonkers because I really don't think that anybody actually knows what they're doing in school.
I'd say majority.
Yeah, the majority.
The majority of people think that they have to
have life figured out.
So many times.
Right. And I just honestly, I tell people, I'm glad that I fell into nursing, but I legitimately fell into nursing. I was like, my dad was a respiratory therapist. I think medicine is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Nursing seems like a logical
I envy
step.
the people that, step out of high school or, 1 or 2 years in college and is like, hey, this is what I love to do. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. But
Right.
And the odd thing when I think about that is a lot of those people that's happened to, they think they're in the majority.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And then, but in reality, they're far and few between people who, you know, step in the door
I've
on their
wanted to do
first
this
day and
since I
then
was
4 years
5.
later leave doing the same thing that they
Right.
stepped into on day one.
Right. So what I'm curious with you is, you know, you had a bachelor's of science in mathematics, right? Is that's what you graduated with? And so what was that mentality when you were in college in West Virginia? Was it, okay, I went as an escape and that was the primary reason, or did you have this kind of plan in your head already outside of just going through school?
Well, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to be when I grew up. In fact, one of the things I always say is that's one of the toughest things anybody does is figure out what they want to be when they grow up.
I still don't
Right.
know.
And
Yeah.
you know, and I thought at first I was really aiming myself. I went to the college I went to was Davis and Elkins in West Virginia, and I wanted to go there 2 years. And my father was an architect, and I wanted to get into landscape architecture. And I thought having a degree in math would be good for that. And I was going to transfer to West Virginia University. But then once I got into the Air Force, ROTC, that kind of went away. And so I ended up going the pilot route for a long time.
Right. So when you were in ROTC, looking back, if there was something that you had to point out that's something that you learned at that point, like while you were going through ROTC, is there anything that stands out to you that's like, you know what, I learned this then, this was an important lesson, and I still carry it with me now?
The only thing I can think is just always do your best. In the Air Force, excellence is one of their primary attributes they like their people to have, and I just do your best. About it.
Right. And I hear that a lot from people that go through ROTC is that it really pushed them to exercise that discipline of will while they're in school. That it allowed them to, okay, now I know that I'm accountable to a different organization rather than just being the traditional undergrad that gets distracted by a lot of the outliers.
Yeah. Well, I would tell you that doing your best is more than just you, because as a pilot, you're doing your best for your crew. Early on, I was an instructor pilot after I graduated from pilot training, and you have to do your best for the student. Teach the student the best way to fly, be honest, and be safe. And doing your best goes a long way.
So when you got out of ROTC and you went to pilot training, where was that? And what? I know that schools evolve over the course of periods of time. So what did pilot training look like at that point in time?
Well, pilot training was 1 year, and I went to Columbus, Mississippi, and I had not flown before I went to pilot training, so I was starting from scratch. There were numbers of people that were pilots before they went to pilot training, and actually some of them had bad habits when they got there, which was not to their benefit, but. So I just learned everything right from the beginning, and it's a good way to do it because if you don't have any bad habits to break, it's easier to do it the right way. So
right,
get it done right the first time.
Yeah,
I mean it's a lot harder to break old habits than it is to just foster the correct ones right off the bat.
Yeah. I also had an instructor that said to me, it's a lot better if you don't fly broke airplanes, which that has stayed with me forever.
That would definitely help.
If the plane's broke, we don't fly today.
Yeah, show some love to your maintenance, your crew chiefs, and everybody taking care of your planes. So what, I skipped over. There's a bunch of different aircraft that are listed in here in this little bio, but what all have you flown, or have you had the ability to fly?
That's a reasonably long list. Started out with T-37 and T-38,
and then so for purpose of the listeners and everything, as you're explaining the type of aircraft, whether it's a prop or it's a jet or just because everybody, I'm not going to know all of them either. So
well, the primary one was when I first graduated, which was the same plane that I flew in about the second half of pilot training, which was a T-38, and it's a supersonic jet trainer. And so I flew that, and then after I graduated, I was rated high enough. When you go through pilot training, you get rated to fly, if you have to get like a fighter pilot rating and an instructor pilot rating. And if you don't get those ratings, you would have to fly multi-engines and sit in the right seat. Well, I had a good rating, so I ended up coming back as an instructor pilot. So I went straight from being a student to being an instructor, which was an interesting, I thought, transition.
Yeah.
And that was another 3 or 4 months in Texas where I got trained to do that.
Is the rating system against other pilots, or is it just like flatline benchmarks for each pilot?
The way they do it is the instructors at the end of, just prior to graduation, the instructors all get together and they consider each pilot and they say, Jan, you're good enough to be this and that, and your grades come into it, your proficiency,
Gotcha.
but sometimes it may just boil down to how the instructors as a group felt about your abilities.
Oh, okay. So they individually go through everybody.
Right.
It's a whole deliberation. Oh, that's very interesting.
And so I think that, and you can, we'll go off on these tangents where, he'll kind of see me look off into the distance and then he knows that this idea is going to come
He's
out.
thought of something.
Right. And so I think when instructors are going through that, because when I went through ALS, right? So for those of you that don't know what ALS is Airman Leadership School. So it's the modern day NCO training. It prepares you to be a staff sergeant. They had an award down there that was instructor peer review and peer-to-peer review ratings. And so I was nominated for, they called it the VIP of the class, and it was a combination of personality, proficiency, all this other kind of stuff that was, your classmates have rated you high, and your instructors, they all got together and rated you high. And I think that and this is, I'm trying to kind of dive into that feeling of what it felt like to get that instructor rating. So for me, when I was down at ALS, to know that my peers were like, you contributed to the success of this unit. And then the instructors were, from our perspective, you contributed to the success of this unit. I think it's a very difficult line to balance pleasing both the peers and the leaders.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to do.
So
when you
completely
initially
different perspectives from each group, and
a lot of times,
one's going to resonate with one, and the things you do is going to resonate with the other. But if you can, bring both of them together, then I would say you're obviously doing something very right.
Right, and I think that a lot of times people think they have to choose. They're like, I either have to please the boss and piss off my peers, or I have to please my peers and be the cool guy with my peers, and then it pisses off my boss. So when you got that instructor rating, you have to probably get, pretty high recommendations for them to say just graduating as a student to come back and teach other people how to fly. What did that feel like internally, knowing that the instructors had trusted you enough to pass on, saying, hey, we believe that you have this capability to teach other people?
It's a great feeling. It's a feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment. And, you're not sure what they're going to do. Although, when you go through pilot training, you kind of have a feel for your ability to fly. And let me mention one other thing before we go any further. When we first got there, the wing commander came and talked to us. Now, it was a full colonel, and we were second lieutenants. And his whole, message to us at that point was judgment. That when you go through pilot training, it's all about judgment. It's about doing the right thing and making the right decisions. And I made a little sign for myself and put it on my desk, judgment. And every day when I would study or do anything, I would look at that and just knew that having good judgment was key to being a good pilot.
Right. Now, if you had to relate that concept to what you've experienced as far as like a leader, in the Guard, we're kind of grouping judgment, decisiveness, that ability to make decisions. I was actually just listening to a TED Talk on the way in here. I like to listen to, these either other podcasts or other people speaking to kind of get in a good headspace. And the TED Talk I was listening to was a gentleman that said that the generation that has had access to infinite amount of information is slowly losing the ability to make decisive decisions. Because
100%.
There's
kind of reliant.
Information overload. And he said that people are they're never bored anymore. So they never develop the ability to, okay, I don't have access to anything. I'm going to take this shoebox and turn it into something to play with. where they don't have the ability to sit down and say, okay, you have 5 seconds to make a decision. They can't do it. So in your experience, like after pilot training and everything, or even just in that localized situation, how has decisiveness and that word judgment played into your personal outlook on how you lead?
Well, for me, being decisive has never really been a problem. I've kind of had confident enough in my own abilities and in my ability to, assess a situation of any kind, whether it's flying or whatever, and come to a decision. So that has not been a problem. I will tell you one thing that I did read. You're all familiar with General Colin Powell. Mm-hmm. And General Colin Powell, I think, put it very well in his book when he said, most decisions, you don't have all the information. You're lucky if you have 40 or 50% of the, necessary information, but you have to make a decision, and especially a lot of times in the military. And he said, but what you have to do is make that decision and be able to adjust it and
Go on the fly.
and make,
No
keep
pun
making
intended.
more decisions so your end decision was the right one.
Yeah.
So, and like I remember, instructing students, the ones that you would wash out were the ones that couldn't make those decisions. I mean, if you're coming down final in an airplane and the weather's not good, and you have to make a decision to go around or land or whatever it might be, and it's got to be safe. And if you're not very confident enough to make those quickly, that's a reason to not be a pilot, I think.
Yeah, you have to be able to operate in the gray.
Yeah.
Really. And I see that a lot in the medical field.
Yeah.
As a nurse, we're constantly the people that, there's people that performed really well in nursing school and aren't as confident on the floor, or they're not confident on the unit. Especially, being an intensive care float, I can be moved every 4 hours around all the different ICUs at the hospital. So I have I have no idea what I'm going to walk in on potentially every 4 hours, and pretty consistently, you only have access to, you're not really sure what the lab values are. You don't know what's going on. You just see a patient actively deteriorating in front of you, and you have to be able to make rational, decisive decisions and at least act. You know what I mean? That first, like you said, being able to adapt the decision, I think, is the most important piece. And people miss out on that a lot. They think that once you have to make a decision, that you have to stick to your guns. That it's like, I made this decision, so I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to give 100% to it, and this is it. And I see that all the time on social media. I see that all the time preached, where it's like, once you make a decision, you have to commit your mind to that decision 100% and give 100%. Which is applicable in certain things. Like when he's going through a bodybuilding show prep, you have to be dialed in, 100% dedicated. This is my outcome. This is my end goal. This is how I'm going to get there. That's it.
And like with that, and just me thinking in my own head with what you just related to me specifically, everything, including what, like when I start a diet or something for a show, has like that set what you're supposed to do to get you from point A to point B. The problem is if it's not adaptable in any means, that one guideline isn't going to work like 95% of the time.
Right.
And so like what you said with the medical field, and obviously as a pilot and me, my body doesn't react the same all the time. Like from my first show to my last show, carbs didn't affect me very much. All of a sudden, I'm bloating 10 pounds because I had like a little packet of salt. I never had to deal with that before. But, a week before a show or something like that, I'm not going to sit there and be like, well, last time I did this, obviously it's going to work for me this time and whatnot, and then walk into a show look like, holding 15 pounds of water on myself. So, you got to kind of cut back and realize that with those types of situations, just because it's been laid out for you, like, when you reach certain parts of higher education, especially within the medical field, they have protocols for what you see. But just because that protocol in that book pertains to maybe 3 out of 4 patients, that fourth patient, even though it might look exactly the same as what you saw in your book, it's going to have to be altered slightly.
Right.
And that ability to see that and not get hung up on the fact that it isn't what you saw every time before, and that you can seamlessly go from, this was it the first time, this was it the second time, this was it the third time, and not automatically try to route yourself and force that 75% that it was on the remaining 25% and actually divert around it and be able to get the same outcome, but not get hung up on it, I think is the most important part. Yeah. Because a lot of people will just get stuck and then they'll just keep ramming their head up against the wall trying to get the same result because it was like that before. But if you can quickly realize that it's not going to be the same, even though, it technically is the same diagnosis or same situation or same end goal, and, quickly and decisively find a path to the same end, then that is...
it's a skill.
Yeah.
It's something you have to practice.
Skill. Yeah. There's a few other things in being a pilot that I think helps you stay alive and be successful. I've always thought you have to be able to think way ahead.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're flying a slow airplane, you can think a little slower, but if you're flying a jet that's going, 400 to 600 miles an hour, you got to think way out ahead. Some other things is, I flew C-130s for a long time. And, you have to seek information from the rest of the crew, the navigator, the co-pilot, loadmaster, and you have to be prepared. You have to know what the weather's going to be, and are there any obstacles? You have to really be ahead of the game is what I'm saying. So it can't be just a happenstance where you just kind of take what comes. You need to kind of be prepared for what might happen.
Yeah, I think there's a big, some of the people that I've talked to, because inevitably everybody's like, oh, you're in the Air Force? Do you fly planes? Like, no.
Not everybody flies planes.
Like 90% of us don't fly planes, actually. There's a lot that goes into getting that plane off the ground that people don't think about. And so it's those intel briefings. It's those people collecting data. It's, the Air Force equipment people making sure that everything is good. It's the crew chiefs making sure that the plane is ready to fly because nobody likes flying broke airplanes. It's the flight engineers keeping the plane going while it's in the sky. The navigator. There's just all of these pieces that have to fit together. And as the pilot, you're almost like the physician, right? You're kind of giving, orders, you're running the show, but without the nurses, without the RTs, it would be extremely hard for a physician to take care of an entire ICU floor with no staff. Impossible.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like localized on the aircraft. It's the same principle. What is one of the favorite, I want to go back to instructors, like being an instructor for a little bit, because I think there's a lot to be said about teaching people. Is there any, I'm curious, is there anything that you realized that was different, when you were going through pilot school, since it was such a short transition, being a student had to have been really fresh in your mind as when you were stepping into the instructor role. Was it eye-opening to look and see what it was like from the instructor perspective? What was that like for the first time, like teaching your first cohort of students?
Well, I don't know that I noticed the big difference. I think I was kind of focused on just trying to be a good instructor and not be what some people call the motor mouth, where, you have to, prep for a flight is really important. And I'll go back to when I was a student. I used to memorize everything that was going to happen on that flight before I went out. If we were, they would tell us you're going to go on an instrument flight and you're going to go from point A to point B and fly an instrument approach and do holding and come back and then, maybe do a visual approach. And I would go through and prepare myself so I didn't have to look at anything to do that. All I had to do was fly the plane. Now, if you were a student that hadn't done that level of preparation pre-flight, you could get in the airplane and you're like focused
on everything else,
on things other than flying a plane. So I wanted it. So I still had to refer to things here and there, but I wanted it to be that my whole focus was on physically flying the plane the way it should be flown. And I tried to teach that to my students, that preparation before a flight is probably one of the most important things.
Right.
So I'll tell you one funny story. I had a student, and I don't think he actually made it through, but he wasn't originally my student. And anyway, we had these knee boards, and his was all banged up, and I never asked him about it. And in the T-38, the instructors generally sat in the back, and the students sat in the front. And it was so funny. One day, I guess he did something wrong, and all of a sudden, I could see the hand go up like this, come down. And I guess when he made a mistake, he would slam his fist on his
Kneeboard.
thing.
my gosh.
I don't think he had the temperament to be a pilot, but
Right.
not that we don't lose our temper, but I thought that was kind of funny. How
You just see the arm go up. You're like, shouldn't that be on something? Why is...
Oh no.
Yeah.
slamming into there. But being prepared. Most people can fly planes. I can't. Eye-hand coordination to do it, but I think you have to be able to focus on the right things.
Well, absolutely. And kind of on that, so on that topic of being prepared, I mean, that's kind of going to push us into our next, arena, which is people tend to group, things in their life that they get locked into a hole where they're like, okay, this is what I need to focus on. None of the other things I've experienced really matter. This is what I need to focus on. How did pilot training prepare you for life in general? As far as like, you're talking about all of these skills, like decisiveness, the ability to learn, being, able to make decisions quickly and make the correct decision, which is something to be said. That's a skill that is, everybody has judgment, but learning good judgment is something that has to be practiced.
Completely different things.
Yeah. Is there things that you look back on and you're like, if I would have not been a pilot, or I learned things as a pilot that are visibly applicable and still active in your temperament just in civilian life?
Well, I think hard work, being prepared, that's always a winning combination. And so I always did that, and I did that in the Air Force. But I'll go back to even just a little bit more. When I was younger, I was, kind of an athlete. I played sports. And I will tell you that if you play sports, and a lot of them are team sports, you're constantly making decisions. Mm-hmm. Who am I going to pass to? What am I going to do? And I think, playing sports when you're a kid, and that was what we did so much when I was younger, in the days before computers and TVs and all that kind of stuff. That helps your decision making, I think. And I think that followed with me throughout my life.
Now, when you were a kid, you have a story about being on the playground.
Yeah.
That is, one of the first stories that you ever told me. And I think is going to be something that around this concept, is with your hard work, making the decision to work hard in order to accomplish a goal, all actually really started
at the playground.
Right?
Yeah. That's a funny story. When I would think back over my life and, where I, kind of evolved to be a leader from, I'll never forget back on the playground, during recess or even after school, we would all meet at a field somewhere. And, sometimes there was like too many people, or there'd be through more than two teams if you were playing basketball, and you'd rotate in and out. And there were certain people who were deemed the best, and they were the leaders. They were the ones that chose the teams. And the bunch of us would stand there, and they'd say, one guy would be the first pick, I'll take you. Mm-hmm. The next one says, I'll take you. And they took you because they knew you were going to be the best for their team so they could win. And, to stand in the peanut gallery waiting to get picked or not getting picked was devastating. And so, at that young age, I thought, if I want to play in these sports at recess and after school with my buddies, because I was, most kids are interested in that kind of thing. Yeah. I'm just going to be the best that I can be. And eventually I thought to myself, if I get good enough, I can do the picking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
and it happened.
I can make my own team.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't have to worry about standing on the sidelines. I can make other people wait.
Yeah. And I can remember a good friend of mine, we used to play a lot of basketball, and we'd go from court to court and challenge people. And we would just beat them left and right because we played so much. And
good practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was where my first, a foray into leadership happened. And I think that's kind of followed through. If you work hard and you're the best, you're going to end up being the leader. I mean, not necessarily, but you could be.
Right. You're more likely to be afforded the opportunity.
Yeah.
I think because people are going to pick up on the fact that you're
putting in the time and effort.
Right.
Yeah.
And the time is something people don't have a lot of patience with the amount of time that it takes to grow into the ability to take a position.
Leadership like that. Yeah.
Right. You know, him becoming a brigadier general all started on a playground
Yeah. Way back. But it's getting those core values instilled, at a young
Early
age
on.
like that, allows you to progress through life, keeping that same concept into every avenue that you touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we get through instructor training. What was next after you were an instructor pilot?
Well, in the mid 70s, after my stint as an instructor pilot, I ended up being, as an instructor pilot, an evaluator. In other words, I had moved up to the point where I was giving the students check rides. And people who ended up doing that always got their first choice of assignment.
Now, so a check ride means that you are checking their ability to operate the aircraft, and
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, at certain points in training, a student would go for a flight check.
okay,
And they would, go to the check section where I was working at that time, and then you would, ask some questions, and you'd fly a profile of different either instruments or just regular proficiency flying, aerobatics, landings, whatever it might be. And then they were graded, and you graded them on these things. And then, if they didn't do well, if they made poor decisions or whatever, you'd fail them. I mean, in my own pilot training class, half of the class washed out.
wow.
And if you failed 2 or 3 flights in a row, you were gone.
So how often do you get the check flights?
They usually, like as a pilot, as an active pilot, like when I was flying C-130s, usually you'd get 2 check rides a year.
Okay.
Throughout your career, you'd get one for a tactical flying and one for proficiency flying.
Gotcha. And did you know when those were coming up?
Yeah.
Or, okay. I didn't know if they were like pop quizzes, like, hey, you're flying today. Good luck.
Surprise!
Yeah.
Yeah, they can do that too. You can get no notices, but as a student, it's a little harder because it's your first ones. Once you become a pilot, they become a little more routine, and you're used to them, and you know what to expect.
You're
and
in it then. It's
Yeah,
not just fresh and right off the bat. And then also you're like, I've done it once before,
Yeah.
and like I can do it again. As a student, you're like, all eyes are on me,
It's
and now I
nerves,
have something
a lot
to
of
prove.
nerves.
Yeah, and the choke factor comes into effect.
Yeah.
Now, I will tell you, as an evaluator, I felt one of my jobs was to make the student feel as comfortable as possible and not intimidate the student.
Yeah, you don't want to scare them off for
Yeah. Yeah.
useless reasons.
You just want to make them feel comfortable, so they're not, afraid of you or something. You just
Yeah.
want to do what they can do. So, anyway, I did that.
To have them, allow them to perform at the best of their ability.
Well, yeah, you don't want them to underperform just because you scare the ever living crap out of them.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
It's hard enough as it is
exactly.
without doing that.
Right. Okay. So then you were an evaluator, and we're just going to kind of, march through your career here until we
Right.
get to, we'll end up getting to your 6 your bullets here, but
Well, then after, so anyway, what I was getting at is we came up in the mid 70s as the Vietnam War was coming to a close for the United States. There was what they call a reduction of force, and there was 8 of us up for assignment the month that I was up, and 5 guys got rifted. They got out, and I didn't get rifted. I stayed in, but I went into what's known as a rated supplement, where you do something besides flying, but I also flew. So I became an air traffic control officer and a fully qualified air traffic controller. And then I flew T-39s. And one thing I'll go back on, excuse me, was as a T-38 instructor, I also delivered fighter planes to Vietnam. And so I flew over to on a military aircraft to the Philippines, and then we flew brand new F-5s into Vietnam, Saigon, and then we flew the old airplanes out, and they went up to Taiwan and then eventually to Korea. So we would make all these flights back and forth. So, but anyway, then I ended up getting out, and when I got out, I got into the Guard, and I was on active duty for 9 years, and then I ended up flying C-130s really for the rest of my career.
And so you got out and you ended up, did you end up at Mansfield right away, or were you at a different guard unit to start out?
No. At first, I joined the Tennessee Guard,
Gotcha.
and I was flying C-130A models. They called them Roman noses. They're the oldest C-130s. It was so funny. The first time I went to the unit, I'd never even been in a C-130. And so one of the pilots said, well, let me take you out to a plane. So we went out to the plane and opened it up. And we went in the back of the plane, and there were lounge chairs and pictures of Polynesian girls and all this stuff. I never realized it.
What's going on here?
It was so funny. It was what they call their comfort palette. And
Oh, my
it was kind of, he was kind of joking me, showing me the inside of that,
Right.
that airplane. But
That's funny.
no, the C-130 was a great airplane. And
So you went from flying jets to, those of you that don't know what a C-130 is, that is a 4-propeller aircraft,
yeah, turboprop,
turboprop. Yeah.
which means it has a jet behind the propeller. It's not because they were too cheap to buy jets. And then, so when I was doing that, when I first got into the Guard, I was also flying for Emory, and I got a job flying for Emory in Nashville, which was like a follow-on to FedEx, and it was their startup thing. So I was flying small prop planes at night, and that was exciting. And but that's when I was in the Guard, and I ended up transferring up to Mansfield after a few years in Tennessee, and stayed up in Mansfield the rest of my career.
What brought you up to, because I'm looking at going from Mansfield, maybe eventually going down to Tennessee. So I can't imagine being in Tennessee already and being like, no, I'll go to Ohio. That sounds like a great plan. Let's move from where the weather is, relatively consistent year round to, we've been experiencing like a sub-zero cold bout for the last 2 weeks.
Days. Oh, yeah.
Well, when I was flying for Emory, you would fly out, and then you'd land in the morning, and then in the evening you would fly back. Kind of retrace your steps to one or two different locations and pick up the packages and the cargo to bring it back to Nashville to get resorted and go out on planes the other way. And one weekend I was here, and a fella that where I kept the plane, the Emory plane, his pilot had quit, and he needed somebody to fly with him. And I flew with him, and just for something to do, and he offered me a job to fly with him in his jet. And so I worked for him in flying his jet and in sales. And it was kind of fun. I enjoyed that.
So what was that? What was that career? Because I feel like, I came into this interview with the intention of, hitting a lot of the military side career, but it seems like you've had, all of these side gigs, quote unquote, that, I had no idea about. So I'm going to dive down every rabbit hole that I get the chance to dive down. So you went from, okay, so we were student pilot, instructor pilot, evaluator pilot, guard, flying for essentially a UPS, Emory, and then flying like a guy's private jet, or how exactly?
This was kind of funny. I have always
where did that even come from? I mean,
know.
just
Well, you knew the people because I would spend weekends there, not all the time, but often. And so you got to know the people just personally. And in my whole life, starting from a kid, I've been a woodworker. And this guy owned a company that made power tool switches. He made speed control switches for tools and other appliances. And so when I went to work for him, I was flying, but I also was in sales. And one of my biggest customers was Black & Decker. And so I thought it was kind of neat to go and sell switches to power tool companies.
Big power tool company.
Yeah, and Milwaukee Electric was another one up in Milwaukee in Wisconsin.
Huh.
So that was was kind of an interesting thing to do, and and whenever we would go somewhere on a trip, I would just go to the airport an hour before the boss and get it ready to go, and and it was.
So it was basically you on-call pilot at all times.
But I worked
Yeah.
every day as a salesperson.
So then it was just kind of like, hey,
then-
when we got to go somewhere, it's
Yeah.
go time.
That's right.
That's kind of cool.
And I think it was good for
Yeah.
the owner because here he had
You're like duly applicable.
a high time, professionally trained Air Force
You got
pilot.
a lot of time behind the wheel.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's like the running joke is like you never want to be a doc's first surgery. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I never walk into a patient's room and I'm like, hey, this is the first time I've ever started an IV.
Yeah.
No.
Get
They're
out.
like, can I get a phlebotomist? Can I get somebody else, please? So yeah, I mean that it still is a lot of confidence. There's a lot of Air Force pilots that fly civilian side, which we'll actually dive into later on because that was an issue that you fixed.
Yeah.
At one point in the unit.
So how long did you fly for him?
It was 2 or 3 years, and what happened is I was a part timer in Mansfield at the time, and an opening came to be full time, and
So while you were working full time for him, you were still in the Guard.
still, yeah,
Part time at Mansfield. Okay.
I had transferred to Mansfield, and I would fly, once or twice a week. I'd drive down. I was living in Hudson at the time. And I would drive down and fly a training flight at night or in the day or go on a trip on the weekends. And it's a busy life to be in the
Right.
Guard and have a full-time job.
Especially as a pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys are constantly on
Yeah.
the go. What rank were you at that point?
Well, I was transitioning from captain to major during that period.
Gotcha. What kind of move to? Because you right now, live in you live in Worcester, right? And are out of the Guard and everything. Like what? Trying to figure out. I'm like, I have so many thoughts running through my head right now. With
You exploded his brain with
yeah,
all
there's
your
so many. I'm like, there's so many avenues to go down. Which rabbit hole do I want to try to dive? I mean, flying. I'm going to retract, that statement real quick. Flying for a company that sells switches. First off, I don't think anybody really thinks about. Has to be companies that produce switches for power tools. People are like, I buy a drill. They just make a drill, but somebody has to produce that trigger for the drill. They produce the casing for the drill. They produce the switches for the drill, all that other kind of stuff. Like, how do you even sell a power switch? Like, was there like a template that you used when you were selling stuff? Did you find that a hard product to sell? Was it an easy transition into sales because of the confidence that you had already built up in the military? And you have excellent people skills.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure that went relatively easily, but that's like
Well,
that rabbit hole just totally
the
blew my head up. So
company that I worked for, the owner had invented the speed control switch. So that gave him an in to these companies that wanted to sell speed control switches. I mean, it used to be when you pulled a switch, it just was on and off.
Yeah.
right.
And now you could pull the trigger back, a quarter of an inch, and the drill would go around at a certain RPM. And the further you've pulled it back, the
Faster it'd go.
faster it went. So the whole thing was done with a little strip, a little resistance strip. And so when the switch was down at one end of the resistance level, you had a lot of resistance, and as you pulled it back, the resistance became less and less and less. So this drill got more voltage and went faster.
See, that's crazy to me because you just said obviously he invented it. Almost every power tool has that on it now.
Yeah,
That's so like to be on the cutting room floor for basically a
future of
passed
power
over mechanical innovation for that time. Now that is basically incorporated into almost every. I mean,
Yeah.
dentistry tools, medical tools, all have that kind of. I mean,
Switch on it.
yeah, and that's crazy that you were flying for that guy. That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, and that's what, I know I've never personally met, but there's a friend of mine knows the family of the gentleman that invented the white cotton pad on the inside of a Band-Aid. You know what I mean? Like,
That wasn't always there.
no, that's what I'm saying. You know what I mean? And then, I wish that I was the person that invented these Curos caps, the little green alcohol caps that go on the end of IVs in hospitals. Every hospital uses them. It's a little piece of plastic with a tiny little bit of alcohol in it and multi-millions.
Yeah.
Because every hospital is like, hey, this is going to help prevent infections. You just screw it on and you screw it off.
Wow.
Like the simplest idea that is now incorporated everywhere. Like you said, that it's just got passed up, and now we're not wasting all these alcohol wipes because we have these little caps. But it's that simple stuff that just...
Yeah. This particular gentleman also was a master at mass production. And he had machines made that made these things as fast as they possibly could. He had people in the factory all working on piece rate.
Okay.
And so he was able to not only take his invention of this, speed control switch, he was able to get a low price on it because of his methods of production. And,
so you're hitting all ends of the sales spectrum where you can say we have an innovative product, it's cheap,
yeah,
and now applicable across. That's absolutely insane.
yeah.
That's awesome. If you had to take away lessons, because you spent so much time with him, it must have been a huge mentor, learning and stuff like that with flying around with him and everything else going on. Having somebody that is like a master of that is just, insane to have that much access to somebody. And I'm sure, just conversations, just having conversations with that type of mind would be interesting, informative.
There's certain positive things you take away, and sometimes there's negative things you take away. As successful as he was, and as smart as he was kind of a tyrant. So he was kind of a one-man show. And I think in my career, I always wanted to be a little more collaborative with people and include more people in decisions. And his was basically,
My way or the highway.
Yeah, and he succeeded in what he did, but it was probably not the method that I would choose to take forward.
And that's something that actually Colonel Brown brings up in the first episode, is that you don't always want to just study the good leaders. You want to look at people that, I would not want to emulate this quality.
Yeah.
Because if you never expose yourself to what you don't want to emulate, you're not going to be able to catch it when you start to show it in your personality.
We talked a lot about decision making, and I'm going to give you an example of what you just said. As a staff member in a unit, we would have staff meetings every week. And the staff meetings would be anywhere from an hour to 2 hours long. And the commander sat at the end of the table. And so issues would come up. And we would sit there under a previous commander and discuss these issues, for an hour or 2 hours. And it seemed like we never came out with a decision. And so some of us would walk out of the room and thinking, well, what are we going to do? And that particular experience, I think, taught me that as the leader, before that, group adjourns or the meeting is over, it's best to kind of say, okay, here's where we are and here's what we're going to do. Now, again, as you get more information, that can change. But when people walked out of the room, they should have an idea of what the next step is and what we're going to do.
Right.
And again, it could change, but
Right.
but they shouldn't go out
Empty-handed, especially from 2 hours worth of a meeting.
Yeah, it's kind of a waste of time, actually.
Right. I think that's pretty high up on the complaint list of people, is needless long-term meetings that don't have any outcome.
Yep.
And you lose a lot of productivity if you take people away from their jobs for 2 hours and they come out empty-handed. They're not looking forward to the next one.
Yeah.
Or if you try to discipline somebody because they didn't get something done, and they're like, well, I would have if I hadn't been in a meeting for 2 hours.
Or I had known what I was supposed to be doing in the first place.
In the first place, yeah. And we'll get to that here coming up. So you ended up getting a full-time position. And there's little tidbits and everything that'll go through, being the 164th Commander and the 179th. But what I kind of want to hone in on and focus on is that transition from being, a staff member to being the wing commander. What that transition looked like and what your outlook was when you were the wing commander. Because obviously you got selected for general, and were asked to move up. So the unit was performing well, So what did that transition look like, and what really pushed you to want to pursue that? Because there's a lot of people that get to a place where they're complacent. They're content with where they are in their careers. I know a lot of people that retire as majors, lieutenant colonels. You know, it takes, a certain amount of mentality and drive to get to that next level because you're staying in for longer periods of time. 35 years is longer than, most people get out at 20, 25, So being willing to stay in that extra time had to have taken, a certain amount of dedication and want to further yourself and the organization.
Well, a few things. It goes back to the playground.
There it is.
It all started at the playground. But one of the things is you have to like what you're doing. And being a pilot in the Guard, a full-time pilot in the Guard, in a military unit, there's so much satisfaction and fun. You're working day to day with people that you highly respect and you like. You're traveling around the country doing a mission for the military or the state or whatever. There's just so much satisfaction in that. So it was a great career to have, and I enjoyed it. So most of the people that I worked with, they didn't want to see how fast they could get out. They wanted to see how long they could stay in. So, and being a commander, again, there's the playground thing, but I always had great confidence in my ability to be, a senior officer and a leader, and I enjoyed it. I think that the approach that I took to leading was to be inclusive of people. So when we had a meeting, when I was commander and everybody was sitting around the room, I was genuinely interested in what you had to say and what you had to say and other people's inputs because we had great inputs. And, I knew that I couldn't do this by myself. And we had to have, a team doing it.
Right.
And so, we got great ideas from around the table. And, I was the guy at the end of the table and say, okay, what do you think? And people, maybe sometimes we voted and sometimes I said, here's what we're going to do.
And see, I like that. There's a time and a place for both.
Yeah.
I think good teamwork and good communication goes a very, very, very long way.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, like you said, sometimes you got to kind of pull back on the reins and be like, well, nothing's up for deliberation here, but this is what needs to be done, and this is how we're going to go about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be able to make those. It goes back to those decisive decisions.
And can you imagine how good it makes somebody in the room feel if we're going around and you give me an input and we end up doing what you suggested, not what I suggested.
Oh, absolutely.
And other people see that and they say,
You're willing to listen.
Everybody wants to contribute.
Yeah.
Everybody can participate, and there's a difference between that and actually contributing to the team as a whole. And I've always liked that. Any aspect, whether school or people that I train with, or even here on the podcast. Regardless of what part you have within our company here, we listen to everybody and the things that they want to do. Our producer, Jake, he really wants to take the reins on the next interview that we're doing and stuff. And he does, our pre-reel and post-reel stuff and like that. And just hearing him talk about the guests that we're having on and stuff like that, it's like, dude, that's your baby. I sit here for every episode, but if it's something you're really passionate about, then get in there, have at it.
Yeah.
I think when you allow people that opportunity to participate and contribute and stuff like that too, it allows them to work better for a longer period of time as well.
Yeah. One thing that amazed me about the Guard, and Jan, you're an example of it, is how amazing the people that come from other other jobs and work in the Guard, how much they have to add. I've met so many amazing people, and I'm not talking. Whether they're an officer or enlisted or whatever they are, they're amazing people and they have great ideas. And we talked earlier about some of the folks we've worked with, like Colonel Brown and Colonel Kramer. These are really sharp cookies that you do yourself a favor by listening to, and and including them in any decisions or ways ahead.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, we'll start diving into these, to these golden rules. Your 6 rules that you have here of how to inspire followers and allow your followers to succeed. Because that's kind of your leadership template, right? Is giving your followers the tools and leading your followers. You're bringing them up and allowing them to perform at the best of their ability. Now that is, I think, the biggest jump between being going from junior enlisted to NCO. Then when you make the jump from NCO to senior NCO to chief, you go become an officer, and then making the jumps to bigger and bigger groups of people. As the people above you see that they are willing to entrust you, at one point, 5,000 lives are under your command, right? Which is a massive responsibility. And you have a large team that is giving you consistent input and everything like that. But you have to consistently, your skills are being honed over and over and over again. And to consistently go back to, even getting out as a brigadier and having the mentality that my career was successful because I focused on making my followers successful. It's cool that you brought up that gentleman was a tyrant, because that probably, really solidified and planted a seed that it's, if I want my followers to be successful, I can't be that, because that's detrimental to their success. So we'll go through here. So the first one that you have kind of goes back to what we talked about in those needless meetings, and it's, you want to make sure that you create a clear mission, vision, and values.
Can I go back one?
Yeah.
Oh,
no,
absolutely.
this is,
One step.
your floor.
Kind of the basis for my leadership concepts, or the way I think about leadership, is it starts with the definition, my particular definition of leadership. And, if you go to Webster's dictionary and you look up it says, to influence people. Well, okay, that's nice, but that kind of leaves me wondering. So I just sat down and I made a leadership definition, and we've talked about it.
Yes, we have.
And it has a number of parts, and it's the art of energizing followers to achieve a shared vision of a better future for the organization and all those involved.
See, I like that a lot better than simple influencer.
Right. I remember that coming to fruition.
Yeah.
When we were at Carpe Diem Coffee, one of the first times that we met.
Yeah. Nope, you've added to that, and I appreciate that. But so that's where it starts. And so leadership is an art. You can learn what I call mastering the fundamentals of leadership, but it's an art because you're melding so many different skills and other aspects together to make the right things happen. It's to energize followers. Now, what you're talking about, and this came from someone else, because I bring in the ideas that I get from other people, from a 2-star in Ohio, and he was promoting a friend of mine to 1-star, and he said the greatest attribute of a leader is helping others succeed, not helping yourself succeed or how you go, but helping others. So that helping them succeed thing is to me is really big, and I think it helps to energize people if they know that you
have that faith, you're backing them.
Yeah, you got their back, and you're working for them, not just for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so to achieve a shared vision. Now, there's been plenty of visionaries that came out with a vision to, whether it's Jeff Bezos for Amazon or the Wright brothers for airplanes or Fred Smith for FedEx or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
They have a vision, but along the way, that vision needs to incorporate the followers and all the people involved in that particular either company or industry or whatever it might be. Yeah. And so, when people get together and they help develop that mission, vision, and values that Jan just brought up there, they really become more committed to it and a part of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's not like the boss came down and said, "Oh, here's our mission, vision, value. Let's go." These people made inputs to it.
They're investing.
Yeah. and hopefully the vision in some way has to have a better future.
Yeah.
Who wants to go backward? Who wants to?
Very true.
So, and I think that it has to, benefit not just the company and the shareholders and the, and whatever, but it needs to help everybody. It needs to help the employees, the followers. It needs to be a benefit to the people that buy it, a better product. I mean, we all use Amazon because it's so darned easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's Andy Frisilla is the CEO of First Form, which is a company that we work with as far as supplements go. And I chose to align the Apex podcast with First Form because of what they stand for. Yeah. And Andy always says on his podcast, because I listen to it pretty consistently to try to keep myself in the right headspace, that you only ever really sell two things. You're either selling hope or you're selling convenience. The only two things that are really ever sold in the world. You're either selling convenience as far as a product, like that speed switch, convenient, or you're selling the hope for a better future. There's the only two products. They have a lot of different forms.
Yeah.
Bottled water, very convenient. Seems stupid, right? That it's profitable, but you put filtered water
$17
in a bottle, and you can put, I won't name the brand, but you put a brand label on it and it's now a $3 bottle of water.
Yeah.
Convenient, right? Okay. So, having that same vision and values too is super important. I think not missing, you need to make sure that your team understands what your vision is as a leader. And if once they understand that they have the confidence that your vision is to benefit the organization of a whole, that creates a lot of loyalty. But in order to do that, it kind of leads us into our second point, which is consistent, honest, and frequent communication.
Yeah. If people aren't informed of what's going on, there's a lot of what you call information voids. They fill that with some kind of other information.
Oh, just chatter, anything.
Yeah.
Basically anything.
And sometimes it's not very positive stuff. So, I think sometimes there's an inclination of people to, go to the negative. So I think that a good leader keeps the flow of information, honest information, truthful. Sometimes it's not the best thing everybody wants to hear, but you can't be, you have to establish honesty. But keep people informed of, here's where we are, and this is good, and this isn't good, and we're going to fix it by doing that. And so, that channel of communications has to be, honest and frequent.
And I believe, even, in today's day and age, that transparency is even more apparent, and people want that transparency more and more than they did in the past.
Yeah.
Like you said, good or bad, you're better off just heading off the situation and letting everybody know what the baseline is now, rather than, thinking you're doing everybody a solid by, putting it off, and then you're like, you hit that oh crap moment, and you're like, well, this is actually what's been going on, and now we're in a really, really bad hole. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree that transparency is great, in that the free flowing communication, and even when I was in school at Akron, that was the main thing all of our sport management classes told us. Was if something happens and you aren't the first one to come forward and talk about it and let the people around you know, they just, like you said, they're inclined to go somewhere negative with it.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to assume stuff spiraling down the drain than, hey, maybe we're getting a $10 an hour pay increase or something like that. No, nobody ever goes in the positive in those types of situations.
Yeah.
And it's usually bad, and then it goes to worse the longer you put it off.
Yeah. Who's going to get fired?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, it goes from
you start
that.
looking around, you start thinking about all the bad things you've done in the last 6 months. You're
And then that just
Downsizing,
cuts down on productivity between everybody as well, and the cohesiveness of it.
Now, that kind of leads me to something that when I was a leader, I like to do. I used to like to wander around a base and talk to people.
Oh, just make that connection with people. Yeah, absolutely.
And you just sit there and chit chat with them, and hopefully do a hell of a lot more listening than talking. But you would be amazed at the insights and the information that you get from people just in a little casual conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
And again, you have to warn a leader that, number one, don't abuse that information, but also follow up. And if somebody gives you a good suggestion or tells you, something needs fixed, get back with them, thank them, and take care of it. But you do have to be careful with the information you gain by just I called it management by walking around, leadership by walking around, whatever you want to say it. I mean,
yeah, I like just in a normal social space, I think that's very important too. I've been at the same gym for like 7 years now, and I get in trouble so much, whether it's from trainers or other people that I work out with, that my workouts take too long. But it's because I know everybody there.
Yeah,
like it is so difficult for me when someone comes up and starts a conversation with me to just be like, yeah, no, sorry, I can't talk to you right now. Because I'm just not that type of person.
Yeah.
I'm a very talkative person. So, every workout, every day that I'm in there, I usually talk to, 5-10 people. And like you said, I get those little stories. There's not a thing that happens at the gym that I'm at that I don't know about, but probably prior to the people that own the place.
Yeah.
And many a times, like you said, you got to be careful with some of the information that you get from just those casual interactions. But there's been many a times I've diffused situations that I could see coming from a mile away because of the people that, I'm friendly with. And, and it's not like I do it to like gain the upper hand, but I genuinely care about, the people that I spend 3 to 4 hours with every single day during the week.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, we don't hang out on the weekends. They don't come to my birthday parties or stuff like that, but it's still like, I spend a lot of time with them, a lot of, free time.
Yeah.
And I'm able to diffuse situations in there because I know what he said, I know what she said, and I'm already there in between it, kind of like, you know what, it was a misunderstanding, this or that, vice versa. Yeah. And I think we've had previous podcasts where we've talked about, just being polite and simply nice to people and listening to them when you have the ability to goes a very long way.
Yeah. No, you're exactly right.
Yeah, and so we're kind of hitting a lot of these, the next 2 points. We're just going to kind of group them together here. Earning trust and respect and being a good listener. But I want to pose a question rather than just stating those. So instead of just saying, earning trust and respect, how do you earn your followers' trust and respect?
I think actually it goes to the one of the last ones, the golden rule. And I think if you treat people the way you would like to be treated, and you show them the respect, listening is a big show of respect. If somebody starts to tell you something and you're not interested in it, or
it's obvious, it's blatantly obvious,
right?
When
Actively listening to them.
Yeah. So I think, and earning respect is they know they have to be able to trust you. Mm-hmm. They'd have to know you're good for your word. That when you make a decision, it's going to be the best you can possibly make in their best interest. And and if you do those kind of things every day, I think it works.
Absolutely,
just treating people the way you would like to be treated.
Right.
Pretty simple.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these concepts that we're thinking, people think that leadership is complicated. And it's not necessarily, like you said, it's an art. It's not necessarily a complicated art. The foundational stuff is simple. Mm-hmm. I mean, these six bullet points, we've already kind of hit all of them. The last one we're going to save. It's actually number 5, but we're going to save that we're going to go off on this tangent and we'll come back to it. But, being honest, earning people's trust and respect, like treating other people as you would want to be treated, being a good listener. These are all things that you don't have to be a leader to do. Mm-hmm. You can do these on a daily basis.
Yeah. Good life lessons.
Yeah, they're just good life
lessons. I think
lessons.
a lot of people, when if you just throw out the term leadership or leader or something like that, a lot of people get this massive stigma like, I have to be in a way higher position than everybody else. Like I have to be kind of looking down on everybody. And I've never seen that. Like in personally speaking, you know, like whether it's at the gym or in my group of friends, like I've always kind of seen myself as the head of that, but I've never seen myself better than anybody else. It's just like I have the means and the skills and the listening capacity and the empathy to bring all of these people together, you know, either on a daily basis or a weekly basis or, you know, whenever me and my friends have game nights twice a month or something like that. But like the last time I was at game night, I look around the room and I'm like, I knew him from Akron. I knew him from high school. I knew him from the gym. And I was like, if it weren't for, you know, my ability, like to bring them all together, we would never be here having these great times we have twice a month. And to me, that's leadership. Like that's not and I don't think a lot of people see that as I do. I think when you throw leadership at, you know, just the general person, they're like, oh, he's telling this person what to do. This person's telling this person what to do, and they're going and doing it. And it's not. It's a unit, like you said, and everybody's listening, everybody's communicating, everybody's, you know, getting their points across where nobody else is, you know, feeling like their toes are stepped on and stuff like that. And if they are, then it's worked out.
Yeah.
And then someone who can sit there and moderate all that and, you know, keep it moving fluidly and still like progressing forward towards like the end goal, then that is a leader.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that kind of feeds into, you know, your definition of the structured versus unstructured side of things. You know, and there's actually, we just talked about something on an episode a couple of episodes ago that I think you'll enjoy, and I'm actually really curious to get your input on. So we talked about a attribute on a podcast where we reviewed one of the first things that I ever wrote for the blog. And I actually wrote it after listening to an Air Force captain give his, he was addressing me when I was initially pursuing my first attempt at a commission. You know, before the medical stuff came up and everything else, I was going to be I was applying for a personnel officer slot down at Rickenbacker in Columbus, Ohio. And I sat across the table from this captain, and he's out now, Captain Howard. And he told me, I was like, Captain Howard, what is the one thing, you know, that you would say is a detrimental quality in new officers? You know, he says that too many times new officers think that they have to be like a scalpel. They have to be surgically precise. They have to be really, really focused in. They have to be good and consistent and, you know, be a top performer 24/7. He's like, I don't want that. He's like, I want a Swiss Army knife. He's like, I want somebody that I can throw into a mud hole with half a crew, limited supplies, and they can still get the job done because they're able to make decision after decision. And they have, you know, a Swiss Army knife has a screwdriver. It has a saw blade. It has a knife. It may have a pair of scissors in it. You know, it has all of these different things in it to where they have the tools and they're adaptable to be able to make these decisions and succeed. So one thing that me and RJ talked about is being a personality chameleon. And some people look at it as, you know, especially in the younger demographic, they're like, oh, you're being fake because you're tailoring your personality different around different people. You know, we talk about in that podcast where you're not being fake. You're just amplifying different pieces of your personality to appeal to different scenarios. You know, I'm not going to be the person that I am when I'm at the Dusty Armadillo line dancing 3 JMO and Gingers in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a staff meeting. 2 totally different sides of Jan. They both exist, you know, but I'm not going to be tap dancing in my boots while I'm trying to pay attention to what my chief is trying to say and relay. You know? And so if you had to kind of take that personality chameleon concept where, you know, you're adapting your personality to different styles of people, different types of people, as you're trying to navigate this honest communication, you're trying to earn their respect as a leader and all this other kind of stuff. What would you say as far as that being something that's either learnable or something that you maybe feel innately? Like if you had to, now that you kind of have that idea of what that is, can you look back and be like, oh, I did that? Or is it just kind of, you know?
I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. But
No, that's fine.
I'm not sure if I even asked a question.
Asked the right one.
I just kind of tend to ramble on an idea.
like
but
when he brought this to, I'm the one that brought this up because he was the whole time he was reading the blog post. In my mind, I was like, like I get along with anybody,
Yeah.
and that's because I'm willing to sit there and listen. And then even if like we come from two completely different worlds, it's nice to. I will always relate the closest thing in my life to what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Whether it's worlds apart, but just the fact that I'm trying to like balance between that. Because like I go to the gym, everybody thinks like, he looks like he can, barely read. He looks like a gorilla and he just lifts heavy weights and puts stuff down.
Wow.
I go home, I built a $3,000 computer. I played video games since I was a kid. I, dabbled in computer programming. I love comic books. So I can seamlessly go from the gym to going home to talking to my friends, and you would think we were two completely different human beings. But that ability to, sit within the demographic that I am at the time, and then converse and, relate, whether it be close or not, it allows me to get closer to people and have a better understanding of people, and then thus, be able for them to help me more or me to help them more. And I think that is a huge part of how I'm able to, be a leader within my group and my friends and my community and stuff like that. Because that was the part that we were getting to. Some people refuse to bend their personality
regardless.
Yeah. And whether it be, a stubborn issue where it's like, this is who I am. This is what I believe in. Doesn't matter what you think. Doesn't matter what you've experienced. This is my experience.
Or I've always done it this way kind of mentality.
And the ability to kind of be like, well, it's not exactly the same, but like I did this or I've been through this. And then to communicate with that person allows a much closer connection and, that more close ability to help one another.
Well, I will tell you what you've kind of expressed is something that I've always. People are they're not always what they appear to be.
Yeah.
They're more complex. Sometimes they can be better. Sometimes they can be worse. But you don't really know the real person till you get to know the real person.
Gotta take the time.
Till somebody knows that you're building computers. You're a gym.
Yeah.
A gym guy.
junkie. Yeah.
But the other aspect of being a leader is, the fine line of the personal relationships aspect of it. Mm-hmm. I tried to mentor a number of younger officers, and sometimes the younger officers were what we used to call, probably they still call hellraisers. And there were people that would, just kind of let it all hang out and maybe a little bit too much. Mm-hmm. And so there's a fine line between being fun and being yourself and destroying, let's say, your leadership credibility, and so you just have to be careful with that. And I'm not telling anybody don't have fun. I'm just saying don't cross the line to where people lose respect for you for things you did, on your off time or whenever it might be. Because I can tell you in the Guard, if you're on active duty, you move from base to base every 2 or 3 years, and it's kind of like fresh starts every 2 or 3 years. Yeah. In the Guard, you're in a unit for 20, 30 years. And when you come up to be promoted or fill a position, there are people that don't forget
stuff you did 10 years ago.
10 years ago, and so you can't let that destroy what you eventually want to be. Now, if you never want to be a leader and you just want to be a hellraiser, okay, fine, good for you. Just don't do anything really bad. But I think you need to, don't cross the line.
Yeah, no, there's time and place for everything.
Yeah. But you can still line dance. You can
I was gonna say, yeah, and you can still line dance both in the context of don't be afraid to go out and have a good time, but also in the metaphor that you're talking about. I think that it's important to know that it's like you can't be afraid of that line either.
No,
because sometimes the best leadership decisions are the ones where your toe is on the line and you're line dancing, metaphorically on that line of being a hellraiser versus being somebody that is incapable of making a decision because they're afraid it's going to piss people off.
Yeah. But it goes back to judgment.
Yeah.
Your judgment will tell you, how far you can go and how far you can't go. And
Well, and that varies from person to person too. I'm sure in your career you've seen, this type of person. I know this specific person I can push to this limit, or I need to push them to go to this next limit in order to have them grow.
Yeah.
But this other person, I need to hold their hand.
Yeah.
And I need to be a little bit closer to them as they're trying to grow because they need a little bit more help.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and this other one right here is giving credit, not taking credit. And I wrote a post on this called the mirror principle, where it's, you want to reflect success. You don't want to be a black piece of cloth that absorbs all light.
Yeah.
Because at that point, that light stops. It disappears. It goes into a void. Whereas if you're a mirror and you're consistently reflecting it out, that success has the opportunity to touch other people. Which is, so why is it important as a leader to give credit and not take it?
Well, because if you take credit for what your followers have done, you're a jerk.
Plain and simple.
It's as a team, when you're a leader, you have to have a team culture. I talk about team culture, and but if the team does well and the team leader stands up in front of people and says, "Look what I did," he's a jerk or she's a jerk. We did this, and maybe highlight what a few people did on the team that might be, exceptional or special. But never ever say, "Look what I did." It's just wrong, And
Bad road to go
and
down.
You just make yourself look foolish and dumb.
Oh, absolutely. You got to understand that it took more than just yourself to get there. A good leader realizes that there's a lot of cogs to the overall machine that got you to the place where you want to be.
Yeah. One of the other things I get in here, and it's in some other areas, is take time to think. People have choices. They make choices as to how well they're going to do their job. I talk about the corner cutters, people that come in a little late, go home a little early, do only what they can have to do, and then there's people that are always going above and beyond.
Yep.
And people have choices, and I think two things you have to do as a leader is, number one, thank the people for what they're doing. Especially the people going above and beyond. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to call people in the office and kind of set them straight that they're not really doing their part.
Right.
Because if you don't do that, the people who are working hard say, "Well, Joe Blow's getting away with that."
Yeah. Why am I working so hard then?
Yeah. So I think, and that's part of the frequent and honest communications.
Yeah.
I remember at one point when I was a squadron commander, they used to call my office the carrot room. And they said because when people went in there, they came out seeing more clearly. And the only thing it was, and I'll tell you another story. I had an officer. His father was a general, and he was an officer. And it's amazing what these folks remember. But he says, "Oh, I remember when you chewed me out." And I had no remembrance of chewing him out. And I guess I called him in the office and told him he was non-current as a pilot. And I said, your job is to be current. And I didn't call that chewing him out, but I was telling him this is what we're here for. We're here to be ready to go to war. And if you're not current, you're not ready to go to war. And he counted that as a chewing out, but
Yeah.
I was just trying to make him know what the standard was.
Yeah, being in the red or being on a bad list is never a good thing.
Exactly.
You never want to be on anybody's radar on a as a red marker on a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Ever.
And oh, by the way, this young man is now a general.
Wow.
Yeah.
He became a wing commander of a
Was a good
B-1
chewing
unit.
out.
And he
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely staying current.
Turned him around.
So you talked about your corner cutters here. You have two other categories that you put people in. So your corner cutters are they kind of come in late, go home early,
Yeah.
they do the bare minimum kind of thing. But you also have the by the bookers
By the
and
bookers.
the team players.
Well, the by the bookers are just people that, they just do what they were hired to do or what, and that was it.
Mm.
And I point out in there that that's fine. Every organization needs those people.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have the above and beyonders, people that do extra and that sets an example for other people to follow. So, we're not going to get mad at the by the bookers, but,
Yeah.
We're going to try to bring the corner cutters, to where they should be and celebrate the, above and beyond people.
And then the team players they kind of they're able to balance everything and try to help the team succeed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. One other thing about this helping others succeed that I'd like to point out is if you know that I'm trying to do the best to help you succeed, and I'm not just talking, I mean, maybe it's I get you the right resources to do your job. Maybe I understand that you have a family and you want to see your kids play some things, so I'm going to make sure you get time off to do that. Yeah. So that works. But I think when you're trying to help people, the followers or people you're working with, your team succeed, I think it creates what I call a team culture, where then members of the team try to help each other succeed.
Yeah.
It's not just about what they're doing and nobody else. So I think that team culture, teamwork culture is kind of big. And I think it starts with the example the leader sets.
No, absolutely. You set up that standard for, and if
Well, you can't expect anybody to that's following you to do something that they visibly know you would not be willing to do yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it all trickles down from the top. They see you do it, and then they're more likely to, reach out a helping hand. And I think that's the way it should be. And it very clearly goes in the opposite direction. If you're clearly not doing stuff, then they're most likely going to be like, well, him up there wasn't doing it, and I'm sure as hell not going to do it either.
Exactly.
Right. Which, I mean, it goes back to even your simplest thing of just walking around. Probably creates a culture with the other people that, maybe I should walk around and see, I wonder how the services is doing today. Let's go thank them for cooking food.
The thanking thing is big. I mean, just, verbally, notes, emails,
Just touch base.
When you get up and you give a speech in front of the unit, the best commanders will thank everybody for something.
Right. So you have an example here of a situation that you actually fixed with the pilots, and bidding on schedules and needing to be present for drill and everything. So I want to explore that, and then there's a couple of questions just, that I sent you, prior to kind of group here at the end, and that's kind of how we'll wrap things up before we decide to give you, at the end of every podcast, we give the guest the floor.
Oh,
and as we're going through the show, have all of these, generally people are like, oh, well, this idea came up and I didn't get a chance to talk about this, or this idea came up. And it's just one last chance to, as the Apex listeners are listening, this is, what you have to.
Closing remarks.
Yeah, your closing remarks. So this example here, and I'll read kind of directly from your show notes. One of the basics for being a member of the National Guard is drill weekend. So in the military, the Air Guard organization, about 30% of the pilots also fly for airlines, and they bid on monthly schedules, and they consistently try to move their schedules around in order to fit the airline schedules. So you encountered a situation that non-airline pilots, it was hard to get an excuse to not come to drill, and people started to see that as a split.
Yeah.
Right? So what, all happened within that situation that you had to kind of toggle?
Well, it was an unfair situation in my view, because I wasn't born yesterday. I know that airline pilots bid for a certain schedule, and they bid for one that's best for them personally, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But a lot of times that particular schedule ignores that they have drill on a certain weekend. But people who are not in the airlines, historically, what I saw was if they wanted a weekend off, the drill weekend off or something, they would say, "Sorry, you have to come." I thought that was unfair, and I just put the word out that, eventually everybody does the training at some point. I said, "Here's what happens: if you have some kind of special family thing to do or some really good reason that you need to miss drill, and it can be for a personal reason. Your kid's playing a soccer game, you want to see it.
Yeah.
Unless there's some overarching reason why everybody has to be a drill, I'll excuse you. That's good. And I think what happened with that policy is, I don't even think it was executed that much by people, but just the fact that they knew
They had the option then.
they had the option made them feel better. And, the airline pilots, they're still going to do what they do, and they come and they make up their drills some other time, and that's okay too. But there are, as you know, Jan, there are certain drills that everybody needs to come because we do training that you can't make up, or it's hard to make up. So that was just an example that I thought helped people succeed a little bit in a way. Not totally, but in a certain way.
Yeah, and that we were talking about before the mics turned on about Emily Bachman, who's one of the, she just won this National Award for Airman and Family Readiness, and how focusing on not just the personnel, or in the civilian world, not just focusing on the employee, but also the employee's family, can really increase that loyalty to your organization. Where if you show that you listen and you're like, oh, I remember Jimmy has a baseball tournament this coming weekend, it's okay. Like, you can go watch your son play baseball on a Saturday and come in on Sunday, and then make up that day. That is going to be, you are going to get such a deep love and loyalty from that individual.
Exactly.
That you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Nobody wants to feel like they're backed into a wall and there's no way out of it, and they have to go and do this, and then they feel like they're forced to slack in other aspects of their life. Nobody wants to be pinned down to feel like that. So just the option, like you said, whether they use it or not, takes a lot of weight off of people's shoulders. Exactly. And that goes a long way.
Being in the Guard is an incredibly difficult thing. I mean, people who have a full-time job, a family, and the Guard, especially in the last 15, 20 years when there's so many deployments, it's tough. And the commanders have to have empathy to do whatever they can to, kind of ease those tensions.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm just going to pull up these questions here. So these are just some things that, I was personally curious on more than anything. So this first one was, what major habit, has changed your life? And we can expand this to beyond just the past 5 years, but what major habit has changed your life in the last 5 to 10 years? Whether it's a daily routine or it's something that you read that heightened something, but just something as a habit that you see that has developed yourself.
Well, I'm retired. And, retirement brings with it whatever
whole slew of challenges.
Yeah, whatever schedule you figure out, when you're working for somebody or whatever it is, you go to work at 8 and 5 and do this and do that and try to fit in. I think just trying to make sure that you organize your life to still be doing productive things, be involved in different, whether it's volunteer work or committees or doing this, passing on things you learned throughout your career. So scheduling is good. I will tell you that, I'm not perfect at it, but I try to stay in shape. And I think, it would be very easy being retired. And I've seen a lot of my friends who are retired, they don't take care of their bodies. And I think that's important to do. And again, I'm not in perfect shape, but I'm doing okay. But I think that everybody needs to pay attention to those things. Pay attention to what you eat. Go to see the doctor. I do my doctor twice a year to, validate some medications and so forth. But I think that's a positive thing because he can see, he knows what you've been doing for the last, they can see the changes. It may not be for the.
Yeah, it's way easier to see changes in a person every 6 months than it is His aunt is a physician.
Yeah.
And then working in the ICU, a lot of times the people that end up on the medical ICU are like, oh, I haven't been to a doctor's appointment in a decade. Like, like I got sick, so I stopped taking
Wonder
my
why
insulin.
you're here.
Yeah.
You know, and some of it's an educational gap. You know what I mean? And that's just there. That's going to happen. Some people just don't understand. They never afforded the opportunity to have the education on these medications, or they were, you know, like, unfortunately had a chronic illness.
You're staying diligent in the free time that is now opened up to you.
Yeah, I mean, and trust me, I do my share of procrastinating things. I mean, I get up every morning and make a list of what I'm going to do, and then I ceremoniously cross them off when I do it. And there's some things that keep coming up, because
For
maybe
the next day.
I feel that.
maybe I'm not quite committed to it. But you just have to have some kind of order to your life. But I think, and this isn't a very opinionated point, Americans in general need to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
We have a healthcare crisis, and it's expensive, and a lot of things can go wrong. And I think people need to take control of their own health better than a lot of them do.
Yeah. Yeah. In the end, you're responsible for it.
Yeah.
It's your body.
If you don't have your health, you have nothing.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so if you could recommend a book to a younger version of yourself, what would it be?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be a book.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Source of media.
Okay, so I'm clearly a baby boomer, and I've read tons of books on leadership and all kinds of other stuff. In fact, I got a lot of books I bought that I haven't read yet, so I need to get on them. But what I found, and we're talking for millennials, for you folks and others, I have become a quasi addicted to YouTube and TED,
Yeah.
and I really enjoy. First of all, YouTube. There isn't anything you're doing that if you can't find on YouTube,
100%.
including leadership, followership, and TED is very similar. In fact, my oldest son got me onto the TED thing. But you put in a topic and you have people give a 10 or 15-minute speech on it, and you learn a lot. But it's in reference to books, what I would say is everybody's leadership experience or anticipated leadership experience could be a little bit different. And there is no shortage of books on leadership. And so what I would recommend to somebody to do is go to the library or Barnes and Noble or wherever you buy books, and just look through them and see which ones kind of interest your particular style or goals or whatever it might be, and read it. The other thing on books is, I was looking at some books. I have a book on Air Force leadership. It's about 2 inches thick. And it's in the smallest print that I'm not sure that my reader glasses can even compensate for. But they tend to write too much on it. And I think it needs to be condensed so it's a little more easier to digest. So anyway, pick whatever book you think, and maybe it's somebody that you admire, some leader you admire or something.
But exposing yourself to the information is the important piece.
Yeah, exactly.
Use your resources.
And when you read these books, you pick out a tidbit here and a tidbit there, and
You have to put together your own package,
Exactly.
essentially. Yeah, because you're never going to really ever be able to follow one template of leadership, and one template's never going to work for anybody.
no.
You got to bend it. You got to pick and choose and packet it all together.
Yeah, when you're reading those books, and that's something that, I have people that I know that have read How to Make Friends and Influence People and take that book as law.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a lot of good principles. I've read it. That it is not in reference, as an analogy. It's not biblical. You know what I mean? You have to take things in there and apply it to your specific situation.
Yeah.
You can't take something that you read in there and then apply it egregiously in a situation that it makes no sense. You have to be able to be that personality chameleon and make a judgment as to whether or not it's actually applicable. There's a book that I got I listen to a lot of books. I have an app that I listen to audiobooks because I'm constantly on the move. And it was called How to Un-F Yourself. And so you have how to make friends and influence people, how to un-F yourself. Those
Good
are two
title.
totally different schemes, right? Yeah. But an amazing, that How to Un-F Yourself is an amazing book that's written from a totally different perspective and is applicable in a lot of those gray area situations that you encounter that how to make friends and influence people may not help you in.
Yeah.
And my little brother right now is like wildly interested in quantum mechanics for some odd reason. He just read this book called Biocentrism, which is like a theory of quantum physics that, I'm not going to dive down too far down that rabbit hole, but he read it as a high school student and is like, some of these theories in here, the exposure to the information. He was like, I didn't understand half of what the book said, but I felt smarter after I read it.
100%.
That's
Felt smarter just you saying the title of it.
Right. When I read Stephen Hawking's The Beginning of the Universe, or one of his books, I didn't understand half the, concepts that he was talking about, but forcing my brain to think about it. I was like, oh, okay. You at least open that door to that possibility.
Yeah.
Right. It's like you're actually practicing good listening skills by either reading or listening to TED and everything, because you're actively engaged in what that person is trying to offer you.
100%.
Okay. So this final one is, what is your favorite failure?
My favorite failure. I'd like to call it a favorite disappointment.
Okay. That's fair. That works.
One of the parts of my career we didn't really get into was as a legislative director for the National Guard Association.
Right. That was post
Yeah.
general, right? Mm-hmm. So you got out and then you became the legislative director?
Yeah, basically the chief lobbyist for the National Guard in Washington, D.C. And I did that for 7 years. And I saw this. I had been interested in legislative affairs and issues when I was still in the Guard. As the president of the Guard Association of Ohio, that part of what you did was, because it was a non-military aspect of what you did, is you'd go to D.C. and walk the halls of Congress pushing different issues you thought were, positive for the Guard and the members of the Guard. So I thought, being the legislative director for the National Guard Association, what better job? I can take that to another level. So I really enjoyed it, and we achieved some success. I think the big success, beyond getting billions of dollars in equipment for the Guard, was getting the chief of the National Guard Bureau promoted to 4 stars, and then on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which we accomplished despite the resistance of the entire Department of Defense. And if you ever want to see an interesting video, check out Senator Graham's talk to the members of the Department of Defense, all the the Joint Chiefs. I was in that particular hearing, and he made mincemeat of them, and it passed Congress and so forth. But the disappointment was, way back when in the Guard, if you go back like 20, 30 years, before we went to an all-volunteer force in the early 70s, the Guard was a bunch of weekend warriors. They weren't as well trained. They didn't have as good equipment. And a lot of the, policies toward the Guard were based on that earlier perception. But in the 15, 20 years ago, within the last 15, 20 years, the Guard is highly trained. I mean, you look at people in Mansfield, our old unit, and they're sharp cookies, and they're ready to go tomorrow. I mean,
and I did do personnel and intel work.
Yeah.
And I had to go qualify on the range. You know what I mean? We all qualify on our M4s, just like every other job would.
So, the Guard is now, to me, a first string member. I mean, when things happen around the world, they call the Guard first. We're ready to go before the actives.
Yeah.
And I think that I thought legislatively that the Congress should pass some laws that acknowledge that. The biggest one being that when you're in the Guard, you earn points toward retirement. And it's only based on each active duty day that you do. Active duty people can be never leave the states and be stationed in Arkansas and do 20 years, and when they retire, they get their pension the next day. And the Guard has to wait till they're 60. And then when you're 60 is when you get the health care. And I think that, what I term, it's a new deal for the Guard, that they should get their retirement because it is relative to how much duty they did in their career. They should get that when they retire at 20 years or stay longer and you get a higher annuity, and they should get health care.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people in the Guard that never came home.
Yeah. Yep.
Yep. And Congress has not passed that yet. So to me, that's a disappointment.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Oh, you're fine.
Now, being that lobbyist, right? That's a civilian position. Did you feel any different about what it was like as far as on the general side of things? Being in the military, having that positional power and everything else, to going to being that legislative director? Because I feel like a lot of people have the stigma that lobbyists are annoying. You know what I mean?
Excuse me.
That seems to be like the, I remember my grandpa, he's passed a while ago, but I remember him going, these lobbyists are, they were the ones ruining Washington and, and so it's like, since you're on the inside of that, what is that actual perception of your work, as you were doing it?
Well, I always called us the good lobbyists. We, excuse me, we never gave a nickel to anybody. And we were very nonpartisan. In other words, the Guard is good for everybody.
Right.
So we were just good lobbyists, and we just pushed our agendas, and we were successful. Some part of the time, and we had disappointments in other parts. But there was nothing that we pushed that wasn't in the best interest of Guardsmen or states or the country.
Yeah, having to be in the best interest of people. I think that's kind of so. Before you have the floor, right? Because we'll just wrap it up here. Which Nick was right. We're coming up on 1 o'clock. Here I was saying,
It was a good talk.
Come
Time
back at
flies when you're having
12:15. He was like, I'll come back at 1.
Yeah.
Almost like he knows. So to kind of wrap everything up to what we've talked about, we talked about you leaving New Jersey, going to West Virginia, going through ROTC, becoming, what student pilot, instructor pilot, evaluator, your career all the way up to making Brigadier, leadership concepts, everything else, and it's going to be really hard to try to distill a 35-year career down. And you constantly are having these different versions of these important points. You know what I mean? But if you had to, you have the floor and you're free to go on as long as you want, dive down as many rabbit holes as you choose. This is your final remarks. So what would you have to offer in your 35 years to, the millennial generation or the people that are out there trying to push themselves to be better leaders?
Do you have an hour?
Go for it. Yeah. I've got the studio until 4 p.m. So
now, first of all, I think one of the best bits of advice I got was always do the best you can in the job you're in. So if you're working in personnel and you have a job, do the very best you can. Be innovative. Be a hard worker. Be smart. Do just the best you can. And quite honestly, that'll accomplish good things, and it will clearly get you to the next level. Because when people see you're doing a good job, they're going to say, "Well, wait a minute. It's his time or her time, for a move up to do a good job at another level." So, I think you have to be competent, and I call them the 3 C's. You need to be competent in your job. I have a son that's a lieutenant now, and I tell him, you need to be the best you can be. You need to know that job. And when your boss comes to you with a question, you need to be able to answer it. Hopefully you don't have to say, I'll go look it up, but sometimes you might have to. But, you need to be competent, and I think another one is to be a leader, you have to be confident. Leaders that aren't confident in themselves and their own abilities, I think they put up walls between themselves and people.
Yeah.
If I'm not confident and you come to me with an idea, I'm probably going to reject it.
Yeah.
Because I see it as a threat to me. If I'm confident, I'm going to be receptive, and I'm going to, say, thanks, let's see what we can do with that. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, and I'll get back with you on that.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing would be to be caring. Everybody's got their things trying to get through life. And so you have to have empathy and caring for the people that you're working with and so forth. And I think if you work hard and you're competent and you're confident and caring, you're probably going to end up doing all right.
Good. I like that. 3, especially because that narrows it down, really well for people. 3 C's.
Yeah.
It's easy to remember.
And it can be applied to any part of your life or wherever you currently are, or any position that you're in. And I mean, it encompasses everything, especially like if you're working in a team. That's basically all you really need.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we'll kind of leave it with. If you have, one thing to take away, confidence, caring, and competence are 3 big things. And that's, this entire podcast, we dove down that massive rabbit hole. And it was, everything that you learn in every portion of your life can be applied in other areas of your life. People tend to think like, oh,
Past is the past.
Yeah, the past is the past. I don't need to apply that to my future. Or, like you said, in the Guard, one of the biggest advantages is taking your civilian career and applying it to your military job. Yeah. Being a nurse, on paper, has nothing to do with human resources and dealing with secret data. But I use principles with nursing all the time as a personnelist because nobody ever comes to see us happy. Like, ever. Most of the time, it's my TRICARE dropped. Somebody didn't get paid, That we work really closely with finance. And finance, nobody really ever comes to see them happy either. So it's like I use those nursing skills to diffuse situations in people because I'm so used to diffusing situations with patients or patients' families. If I would have never had that psych training or the nursing training, I'd probably get pretty heated sometimes with people. But now, I have that civilian career to be able to bring it in. And it forms this cohesive relationship across an entire spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely.
So cool. Well, I want to thanks for making the drive.
Yeah, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Been, awesome having you in the studio. We're going to be, as for all the Apex Chasers that are listening right now, me and General Green are working on a lot of things in the background. So you guys will be able to look forward to.
Keep your eyes peeled.
Keep your eyes open. As content will start to produce and, we work on different versions of things that we're trying to come together on as far as leadership, followership. That's the only thing that I'll say right there is leadership and followership is kind of going to be what our content is going to be structured on that we're working on together. But I am sure this will not be the last time that you have heard from Brigadier General Green. So just as a reminder, if you want to support the podcast, the best place to go is www.patreon.com/The Apex Podcast. That is a place where you can become an Apex Chaser by clicking on the Become a Patron link. All we ask, as a minimum to become an Apex Chaser is $1 a month. It's easy peasy. You just click on the button. You can put in a credit card. You can put in a debit card, any form of payment. And it basically deposits, we get 90%. We get 90 cents on the dollar for every dollar that's donated. And
every bit helps.
Every bit helps. All it does is it allows us to purchase microphones. It allows us to travel to Indianapolis like we did to get that interview with Sergeant Daggett that everybody has been responding so well to. And allow us to continue to expand our outreach and our capabilities. Also, there's going to be a lot of Patreon-specific content that Apex Chaser is going to have access to that RJ is really spearheading, and he's taking a portion of the company and making it his own. So that portion will be available and it'll continue to develop.
We'll keep dropping bigger and bigger hints as it comes closer to the actual launch date. But there's definitely, the main thing we want to do here is we want to build a big community, and like what we talked about, having that transparency and the ability to communicate and listen to one another, not just between us, but between, the person that you may not know now that is listening to the show right down the street, or the individual in a completely different state on the other side of the world that is listening to the podcast. We're working on something to have that ability for everybody to be in contact with us, to be in contact with each other, share our ideas, how we feel about things, talk things out, and it's something, me personally, I'm very, very excited to be a part of.
Yeah. So you keep your eyes open for that as we form the Apex Chasers community. As always, we will be, on in another couple of weeks.
It was an absolute pleasure. I know Jan's obviously met you before, but I have not had the luck. It was great talking to you. It was a great conversation. Oh, yeah. I love talking. So, and you're a great speaker. So just hearing you talk through all your points, and you've lived a very interesting life, and it's very exciting to hear, and like 95% of the reason I've done this show is because I knew that I'd have opportunities to meet people and do things that I'd never have the ability to do outside in my, outside of this. So I'm very grateful to be able to have you here and talk to you. It was a great conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Good stuff.
We'll have you back as soon as we can.
I'm looking forward to the leadership followership thing. That can be something really cool, I think.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. And with that, everybody, keep chasing your apexes.